It's a new year, I'm in a new studio, and I've got new headphones.
This video is sponsored by DistroKid. Follow the VIP link in the description down below to get 7% off an already amazing price to distribute your music to the world.
Hi folks, I'm Mike, and I hope you're well. I'm settling in here in my new Studio B. You can watch a video about that just here. And although this space was initially intended just for editing and composing, I'm enjoying it so much that I'll be adding some room treatment so I can try it with some recording and mixing as well. Now with that in mind, I've chosen two new pairs of headphones for this space. The WA-HRs from Warm Audio and the DT1990 Pro MKIIs from Dynamic. Two very different types of headphones for different purposes in very different price ranges. Now the fact that I've chosen these headphones already probably tells you that I do actually like them, but that's not to say they're perfect. So we'll be discussing both the pros and cons to help you make an informed decision. I'll also be discussing how I go about choosing different headphones for different purposes in the studio. So let's start off with the less economically challenging ones, the WA-HRs from Warm Audio. To be perfectly honest with you, initially I was not very interested in these headphones. So we'll talk about how they won me over in just a moment. But first of all, I'd like to talk about closed back headphones in general and how I go about choosing them, because I've got something rather shocking to say. I don't think that sound is the most important thing when you're choosing closed back headphones for the studio environment. I know, shocking, isn't it? Let me explain. What's the purpose of these headphones? We're going to be using them for monitoring while we're tracking. So they'll be on your head while you're singing into a microphone or playing an instrument into a microphone. What you're not going to be using headphones like this for is critical mixing decisions. And that's why sound is not so important. Should be adequate. You should be able to clearly monitor what you're recording, but there's a couple of things which I think are way more important than sound. First of all, comfort. You could be wearing these on your head during a grueling session for many hours, and you don't want to start feeling irritable because your headphones are uncomfortable. So comfort is super important with these types of headphones, in my opinion. The other thing that's important is bleed. So you don't want too much sound to bleed out of these headphones into the microphone that you're performing into. You want a little bit of separation there for the mix later on, as much as possible. So that's another thing that's important. But sound, yeah, I think it should be adequate at least. And even pleasant might not be a bad thing in terms of getting the best performance out of an artist, but it's not actually crucial. So honestly, I wasn't even expecting to receive any headphones from Warm Audio. I certainly didn't have an agreement with them about making a video or anything. So I was a little bit surprised when I saw them arrive in the post. And initially, when I saw a photo of them on the outside of the box, I was not that impressed. Something about the orange color maybe on this plastic housing made me feel at least that they looked a little bit cheap. So I thought, you know what, I've already got a whole bunch of closed back headphones. Perhaps I'll just pop these in a drawer somewhere and think about them later. But then I thought to myself, hang on a second, I didn't even know Warm Audio make headphones. Now I think I was right about this because I do believe these are the first ones that they've released. Now that got me intrigued enough to actually open up the box, because initially I thought, well, how do these sound? How do they perform? Now, it was when I opened up the box that I began to be a little bit impressed, because I'd looked up the price of these. I'll put a link for that, by the way, in the description down below so you can see the current price. And these are very inexpensive headphones. So the fact that inside the box there was this kind of carrying case, that you got two detachable cables, a straight one, a curly one, and you got some spare pads as well, was really impressive to me. Now, when I did look these up online, I also found out that they come in two other different colors as well. So the orange factor was going out of the equation. Although I have to say, it's really grown on me since, and I actually really like this colour. That was an initial impression. So then I thought to myself, okay, so they feel really nice. They're super light to begin with. When I pop them on my head, I can see, well, these are going to be really comfortable for tracking. That lightness and the comfort of these pads, which are really squishy and nice and fit over your ears nicely, is really going to help for comfort. And as I said earlier, that's super important for tracking. Added to that, the materials on the headband are very similar as well, and they feel really nice. So I thought to myself, okay, I better give these a test run. Now, initially, I just plugged them into my old iPad, which has a headphone jack. And the first thing I noticed is how loud they were. These are 40 ohm headphones. I'll pop that and some other specs up on the screen at the moment. So they're going to work with pretty much any device, any audio interface, things like that. So they're pretty good in that way. And I listened to a bunch of reference tracks that I always test headphones on and have done for some years now. And I got an impression with the sound, which I was really pleased with. So let's talk about sound now. So having said that sound is not all that important for closed back headphones, I would say that it's important in the sense of it needs to be pleasant enough for the artist to enjoy what they're hearing. And that's definitely what I got from these. But let's talk about the different frequency ranges. Starting off with the low end. My feeling was that it's got a reasonably solid low end to this. It's definitely there, but it's not hyped in the same way as your consumer sort of Bose and Beats headphones. But I wouldn't describe this as an accurate low end. I would describe it as kind of mushy and squishy, those types of words. In other words, it hasn't got a really good transient response in the low end. I wouldn't expect it to, but it's worth noting that you wouldn't make great mixing decisions for the low end using these headphones, nor should you expect to. In the higher end, yes, it delivers nicely in the high end. You can get some nice airiness there. You can get a sense of detail because you've got some sparkliness there in the high end. I still wouldn't describe it as accurate, but it definitely isn't harsh, and it's reasonably pleasant to listen to. Now, the mid side of things, or the mid frequencies, is what I noticed the most. I would describe these as a bit sort of boosted in the mids. That's the way it felt to me. Even if I was to use a negative word, a little bit boxy. That was a little less pleasant, but not really unpleasant. Now, you may find this an advantage because it means it's accentuating those mid frequencies where you're going to find things like vocals and acoustic guitars. So that might sort of help the artist while they're performing because it's exposing the part that they are actually performing. But yeah, I definitely felt it was a little honky or boxy sounding in the mid. Just a little. I don't want you to think this is an awful sounding headphone. It's not. But that was my perception while I was using these. Overall, given the sort of price range of these, given the tracking or recording qualities of these, and given the fact that the sound is at least reasonably pleasant to listen to, I was convinced enough to choose these headphones to use in my new Studio B. So open back headphones like these DT1990 Pro Mark IIs have quite a different purpose in the studio. For a start, you probably won't use them for tracking or recording because they tend to bleed too much sound, but you may be using them for extended periods when you're editing or even mixing. Now, of course, especially in terms of mixing, the sound then becomes the most important aspect of the headphone. Now, I know for some of you, you'll say you should never ever mix on headphones at all, but for a growing number of people, I'd say they're doing entire mixes on headphones. Now, for me, I sit somewhere in between. I prefer, if I can, to use my studio monitors for mixing, but I always at least test my mix on headphones. Now, I find it especially useful in terms of monitoring the low end, because for most of us, we could still do with better treatment in terms of the low end in our studios. So it's great to be able to take the room out of the equation and check on headphones. Of course, The headphones have to have an adequate enough low-end response to do that, but that's what we're going to talk about in terms of sound with these headphones in just a moment. But a very different purpose with these types of headphones. So when it comes to Beyerdynamic, I expect good things. And although I already own 4 other models of their headphones, I haven't actually tried the DT1990 Pros before. These are the Mark II versions, and I've never tried the Mark I versions before. And given the more expensive price bracket, I was really expecting good things from these German-made headphones, and I have to say, as soon as I got them out of the box, I was not disappointed. Let's talk about what's in the box first of all. Just like the other headphones, as you would hope for in this price bracket, you do get that carrying case. You get 2 detachable cables which have this kind of mini XLR type connection on them, so you get a straight and a curly cable, and you also get a couple of spare ear pads. Nice to see all that, but what about the actual quality of the headphones? So I'm much more used to things like the DT990s, and if you own a pair of those, or if you've used those or the 770s, think about those headphones with just another slight level of quality, at least aesthetically and in terms of the actual hardware. Yes, the hinge is very similar or the same, and the pads are pretty similar, but overall you just feel the quality has risen up just a tad, especially in terms of things like the stitching on the headband, etc. So I was very pleased with the feel of them in the hand. They're not super light, and they're also not super heavy, somewhere in between, and I feel quite confident in terms of wearing these for quite a few hours for editing or for mixing. So in that sense, I'm pretty happy. Of course, unlike the other headphones we talked about earlier, these don't clamp especially hard. You wouldn't need that, nor would you want it. They just feel just about right to me, at least on my size of head. And just like all of my other Beyerdynamic headphones, they cover my ears completely, and they feel nice and comfortable around the ear. Now, I first tested these again using my iPad with its old headphone connection, and just to talk about volume first of all, with this version, these are 30 ohm versions. Again, I'll just throw a few specs up on the screen for you to do with these, but because they're 30 ohm, it means not only are you going to be able to use them with any consumer type goods quite happily, but you should be able to happily use these with pretty much any audio interface that you've got. And in the past, sometimes with my other Beyerdynamic headphones, that's been a little bit of a problem, so you won't need an extra headphone amp or anything like that for these. So once I plugged them in, I got the chance to have a listen to them. Let's talk about sound. Now, before we do talk about sound, I've got to keep the lights on. So do remember, if you're releasing your music to places like Spotify, Amazon, Google Play, etc., check out our sponsor DistroKid. If you follow that link in the description down below, you'll get 7% off of your first year of membership. Now, I know for some people, they like to judge the sound of something by looking at a graph of some kind, a frequency response graph or what have you, and that's fine. You do you, but that's not how I roll. I prefer to listen to the equipment and make my judgment in that way. It's not as scientific for sure, but that's just the way I feel more comfortable judging things. Now, I don't do this in a random kind of way. I've used the same reference tracks for some years now. They each offer something a little bit different in terms of what they might expose about a mix. But probably more importantly than that, I know how those songs should sound. So the reason I've given you that context is because the very quickest way I can describe the sound of these headphones is that pretty much everything sounded exactly as I think it should sound. Some of these are mixes that I've been listening to for 20 or 25 years, so they're super familiar to me, and there was just nothing that was surprising. I'm really going to hesitate to use this word again, pleasant, but they were pleasant to listen to, but not in that kind of consumer headphone, everything sounds so nice kind of way, but just as I say, the mixes sounded as I think they should sound and as they've sounded to me over years. Now, there's just one small caveat to this. Well, let me get to that in a moment, but let me just cover some of the frequencies. Really, especially the low end, I like the low end on these headphones because I know how the low end in these songs should sound, and it was neither hyped nor was it weak, and there was just enough punch there when there should be punch, and when it was warm and mushy, it sounded warm and mushy. So, you know, that's what I mean about what I'm expecting in terms of these reference tracks. So yeah, the caveat. I felt that somewhere, probably in the high mids, around about the high mids, I was getting, perhaps they were just just a little bit hyped, I would say. Okay, so just in those areas, I was getting a little more, well, I was going to say detail, more apparent detail than I would expect in those areas. Okay, so we're talking about the higher end of, say, a vocal in towards the sort of sibilants and that kind of area, or, you know, the same sort of thing on guitars and things. So it's not that that's a bad thing, but I would be aware of it if you were using these for mixing, because you may overcompensate in those areas because you're feeling, oh, that's sounding a little bit harsh there, you know, I'll tone it down, and it may be unnecessary. As always, I think it's important to listen on lots of different things before your final mix. But I definitely feel that if I was going to try and mix on these headphones, I could do a big percentage of my mix on them, and I'd probably have to use some other devices as well for the mix. So I've already been using the Beyerdynamic in this studio for lots of editing, and so far I'm thoroughly enjoying them. But I am looking forward to getting some room treatment up in here. Now, I'm not going to cover up the windows or anything like that. I still want to have that lovely daylight streaming through for my creativity, but I'm going to have just enough so I can do at least some recording in here, and then those warm audio headphones are going to become very, very useful to me. Let me know in the comments down below which headphones you've chosen and why. What is it you like about them? I'd love to hear from you on that, and I'll see you in the next video.